I found out my wife was cheating, filed for divorce, started seeing someone new, and then my ex began stalking us before trying to run us over with her car. Hey Reddit, I've been lurking here for years, but today I finally have something of my own to post. I've wanted to write this out for months, but my life has been such a disaster that I barely had time to breathe, let alone sit down and type everything out. Now that things have finally calmed down, I feel like I can share what happened, if only to help someone else avoid ending up in the same nightmare. So here's who I am. I'm a 36-year-old man, and I was married to Carolyn, 35F, in what I believed would be a lifelong marriage. Instead, it turned into 6 years I'll never get back. The marriage itself wasn't awful, at least that's what I kept telling myself. We met through Instagram, and at the time I genuinely thought I'd won the lottery. She was beautiful, funny, and seemed almost too good to be true.
Because of my upbringing, I was hyper-aware of red flags. My childhood was rough. My mother was extremely abusive toward my father. Screaming matches in the middle of the night, dishes being thrown across rooms, chaos that never seemed to end. My dad stayed because he loved us and didn't want to break the family apart. Watching that made me promise myself I'd never repeat that cycle. So when I started dating Carolyn, I watched everything. For 2 full years, I paid attention to how she treated waitstaff, how she handled stress, how she managed money, how she reacted when things didn't go her way. I evaluated every detail people say you should before committing. And honestly, she passed every test. She was calm, kind, patient, generous, everything my mother wasn't. I truly believed I'd done my due diligence and chosen well. I remember telling my best friend that I'd finally broken the cycle of abuse in my family. Turns out, I couldn't have been more wrong. But I'll get to that later.
We had a beautiful wedding. We bought a modest house in the suburbs. I thought we were building a future together. What I didn't know was that I was stepping into a nightmare, just not the kind I grew up with. About 2 years in, everything started falling apart. And when I say falling apart, I mean hard. We went from being the couple everyone admired to having massive, explosive arguments every single month like clockwork. And the reasons were always ridiculous. Dirty dishes, me working late, her spending too much time with friends, even disagreements over what shows we watched. I worked my ass off trying to fix things because I truly believed our marriage was salvageable. This was the same woman who used to slip notes into my lunch and surprise me with spontaneous weekend trips. I couldn't understand how we went from that to her screaming at me because I bought the wrong brand of coffee. I've always believed things should be repaired, not discarded.
So I suggested couples therapy. Actually, I begged for it. I found a well-reviewed therapist who specialized in married couples, scheduled the sessions, and paid for everything myself since Carolyn said therapy was my idea. We made it to exactly 1 session. It was a disaster. The therapist gently pointed out some unhealthy communication patterns and suggested that maybe Carolyn's way of handling conflict wasn't productive. Carolyn completely lost it. She burst into tears, accused the therapist of attacking her, refused to ever return, called him a fraud, and claimed I was trying to paint her as unstable. Later, I learned that her father had passed away right around the time her behavior started getting worse. I tried to be understanding. Grief can do strange things to people. But she refused to talk about it, refused to seek help, and only grew more distant and angry.
She never got physical or destroyed property, but her screaming matches were intense enough to wake the entire neighborhood. One time, our neighbors actually called the police because they thought someone was being killed. In reality, it was just Carolyn screaming at me for forgetting her dry cleaning. Eventually, we settled into this hollow routine. Oh, how pathetic that sounds. I clung to memories of our early days and convinced myself that if we just tried harder, we could get back there. I believed in the whole for better or worse part of our vows. What I forgot was the forsaking all others part. I should have noticed the warning signs, but I was raised to believe marriage was sacred.
Unless there was physical abuse or cheating, you stayed and worked through it. I didn't realize one of those deal breakers was about to crash into my life head first, and that's where everything truly unraveled. To set the stage for how everything finally collapsed, here's some background. I work a painfully average corporate job, nothing impressive. I'm a mid-level employee who pushes paperwork, sits through endless meetings, and is important enough to travel, but not important enough to sit in first class. That kind of job. I was sent to a business expo in another state for what was supposed to be 4 days of networking, client small talk, and pretending to care about PowerPoint slides. 3 days into the trip, everything went sideways. Our office back home had a major emergency. Servers went down, client data was at risk, the usual corporate panic. My boss called everyone back early.
Being the responsible employee I am, or maybe just a fool, I booked the first flight home without hesitation. Somewhere in my head, I had this ridiculous romantic fantasy. You know the movie trope where the husband surprises his wife and they had this emotional reunion? Yeah, I actually believed that might happen. During the Uber ride home from the airport, I planned the whole surprise. I stopped at an upscale florist and spent $80 on her favorite flowers, purple orchids she always said reminded her of our first date. I picked up a bottle of wine and the fancy chocolates she liked. I convinced myself this could be a reset button for us. We'd been distant for months, just coexisting, and I thought maybe this spontaneous gesture would remind her why we fell in love in the first place. I got home around 2 p.m., feeling proud of myself, arms full of flowers and bags. Everything looked normal. Her car was in the driveway, which made sense. She worked from home on Thursdays.
A few things struck me as odd, though. Her favorite playlist was blasting upstairs, which she only played when she was in an unusually good mood. There were 2 wine glasses sitting in the sink, but I brushed it off, assuming she'd had a friend over. I was painfully naive. I walked upstairs toward our bedroom, excited to surprise her. The music grew louder. I heard other sounds too, but my brain refused to interpret them. You know that moment in horror movies where the audience is screaming at the character not to open the door? That was me. I turned the handle. I opened the door, and my entire reality shattered. Every happy memory, every ounce of trust, every I love you disintegrated in a single second. There was my wife, my partner of 6 years, beneath a stranger in our bed. The same bed where we talked about having children. The same bed where I held her while she cried over her father's death. They weren't even trying to be quiet. It was like I didn't exist.
Like our marriage meant absolutely nothing. The flowers slipped from my hands and hit the floor as I stood there, frozen. They scrambled apart like roaches when a light turns on. Panic, chaos, shame. The guy, unbelievably, tried to sprint past me as if I were just an inconvenience. He fumbled with his clothes, dropping things everywhere, desperate to escape. Something inside me snapped. I don't know if it was seeing him in my place or the sheer disrespect of thinking he could walk away unscathed, but before I consciously decided anything, my hand was around his throat. I wasn't trying to kill him, but I made it very clear he wasn't simply leaving. I ended up slapping him. Not punching. 2 open-handed slaps across the face, like something out of a soap opera. Even now, I don't know why I didn't swing harder. His expression shifted instantly from fear to anger, like he actually thought about fighting me in my own home after being caught with my wife. The audacity was unreal.
I doubt he even knew she was married. She probably fed him some story about being single or separated. To him, I was probably just some unhinged ex. I let him go before things escalated, not because I was scared, but because I realized he wasn't worth ruining my life over. He hadn't made vows to me. He hadn't promised forever. He was just another guy who couldn't keep it in his pants. The real betrayal was still standing behind me. When I turned back to Carolyn, my entire body was trembling. There she was, the woman I'd devoted 6 years of my life to, fumbling with her bra like this was just an inconvenient interruption. The purple orchids lay crushed across the floor, probably stomped on as her affair partner fled. I stood there watching her adjust herself in the mirror, the same mirror I'd mounted for her last Christmas because she said the lighting was better. She took her time, smoothing her hair, refusing to meet my eyes, acting like she hadn't just obliterated our marriage.
And then she spoke. Instead of apologizing or even pretending to explain herself, she looked at me with pure irritation, like I was a salesman who had knocked at the worst possible time. "Why are you even back?" she snapped. That was it. No remorse, no shock, no attempt to justify what I'd just walked in on. She was annoyed that I'd returned early and caught her cheating in our bed, in our house, the one we bought together and that I paid most of the mortgage on.
I've never wanted to hit someone so badly in my life. My hand actually twitched, remembering how satisfying it felt to slap her affair partner. But I just stood there, frozen, as she muttered under her breath, "You weren't supposed to be back." As if this was somehow my fault, like I should have given her advance notice before interrupting her betrayal. The sheer audacity of it all was unreal. 6 years of marriage reduced to a minor inconvenience in her afternoon plans. What made it even worse was what I noticed next.
Our wedding photo was sitting right there on the nightstand. The same nightstand where she'd placed the breakfast in bed tray I made her just the weekend before. The same room where she'd been telling me she was too tired for sex for the last 3 months. Apparently not too tired for some random guy. My mind spiraled. Every late night at work she'd mentioned, every girls' night, every time she said she was visiting her mom. How long had this been going on? How many men had been in my bed? I was about to find out, because she wasn't done talking. She suddenly exploded, screaming at me like I was the villain in this story. "You weren't supposed to be back," she shrieked, her face flushing the same way it always did during our worst fights. "This is your fault. If you had told me you were coming home, you never would have seen this." The mental gymnastics were Olympic level. She was blaming me for discovering her affair.
Then she dropped the next bomb. "I asked you for an open relationship, and you said no." Yes, she had brought it up once, during a drunken conversation 6 months earlier. I said no because I believed in monogamy. In her twisted logic, that apparently gave her permission to cheat anyway. "I have needs," she screamed, like I was some kind of monster for expecting basic loyalty from my wife. "I tried to do this without hurting you." The insanity of that statement hit me like a slap. She tried to cheat discreetly. How considerate. Something inside me finally broke. 6 years of trust and devotion reduced to "I have needs." Every kiss, every promise, every shared moment suddenly felt fake. I crossed the room in seconds. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the collar of her shirt, the same one I'd bought her for her birthday the month before, and raised my fist. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the pain ripping through my chest. Then I saw her eyes. Real fear. Genuine terror.
And even though she destroyed everything, even though she'd proven our marriage was a lie, I couldn't do it. I wasn't that man. I refused to be. I remembered my father's face, the fear he carried for years, and I swore I would never put that look on someone else. I let go and stepped back, fists clenched, heart pounding. A part of me still wishes I'd given in to the rage, not because she didn't deserve it, but because the pain was overwhelming. Still, I'm glad I didn't. I deserved better than becoming what I hated. There I stood in my own bedroom, surrounded by crushed orchids, staring at a stranger wearing my wife's face. 6 years gone, and she was still blaming me for catching her cheating. The moment I released her shirt, she flipped like a switch. Suddenly, she wasn't scared. Now she was the victim. "You were going to hit me," she yelled as I walked away. "This is why I don't love you anymore."
"You're not even a real man." She followed me down the hallway, hurling insults, trying to provoke me. It hit me later, after I talked to my friend that night. She wanted me to hit her. She wanted proof, something she could use to flip the narrative, turn herself into the abused wife, and walk away with my money. The woman who once made me soup and I was sick was now baiting me into domestic violence. That realization made me physically sick. I had to get out of that house. The place was soaked in betrayal, literally. Their scents mixed in the bedroom, in the sheets, in the air. The bed where I'd held her during panic attacks was ruined. I grabbed my wallet and keys and left. I ended up at my friend Mark's place. Thank God for Mark. The second he saw my face, he didn't ask questions. He just poured whiskey. Mark had already been through a divorce himself, so he understood exactly what kind of hell I was about to walk into. Once I told him everything, he didn't sugarcoat it. You need a lawyer immediately. Here was the problem. I made 6 figures, and Carolyn only worked part-time at a boutique, more like a hobby than a career. In our state, that meant I was potentially on the hook for alimony, even though she'd been caught cheating.
The idea that I might have to financially support the woman who had another man in my bed made me physically nauseous. The legal system can be brutal like that. You can be the one betrayed and still end up paying for it. But Mark, smart bastard that he is, pointed out something important. Infidelity could affect alimony calculations if it was documented. Save everything, he told me. Texts, emails, receipts, anything that proves she stepped out. Finally, a shred of good news in this nightmare. Maybe I wouldn't have to bankroll her affair partner's dinner dates after all. My head was spinning. That morning, I'd been a married man planning a romantic surprise. Now I was sitting on Mark's couch, Googling divorce attorneys and fighting the urge to throw up every time the image of that bedroom replayed in my mind. There was zero chance I was going to try to fix things with her. I might be dumb enough to buy expensive flowers for a cheating wife, but I wasn't stupid enough to forgive one. While I was still processing everything, my phone started lighting up. Carolyn had apparently decided that since manipulation didn't work in person, she'd try through text instead. What she sent was unreal. This was the same woman who'd been sending me heart emojis and I love you messages just days earlier. Now she was sending long, detailed messages comparing my body to her affair partner's. Explicit descriptions, measurements, performance critiques. It read like a full-on review, breaking down how much better he was in bed and how she'd supposedly been faking it with me for years. She wrote paragraphs, an actual essay, listing my supposed sexual failures, like she was leaving feedback for a bad restaurant. She even claimed her affair partner had ruined her for other men, as if I'd want her back after catching her in our bed. And the kicker? She was furious at me for ruining her good time. She accused me of being selfish for coming home early, said I'd destroyed her chance at real happiness, and acted like I'd violated some unspoken rule by interrupting her affair. The mental contortions were unbelievable. Mark immediately told me to screenshot everything, document every single thing. He was right. Less than a minute after her unhinged rant, I watched message bubbles disappear one by one. She must have realized that confessing to adultery in writing wasn't a great idea when divorce was looming and I made 3 times her income. After deleting the incriminating messages, she switched tactics.
Now it was just generic insults, carefully avoiding any mention of cheating. Watching those texts vanished felt like watching someone desperately wipe fingerprints off a crime scene. Too bad she didn't know I already had screenshots of everything. She could delete the messages, but she couldn't erase the truth, or the images now safely stored on my phone, ready to be shown to a divorce judge. That night, Mark became my unofficial divorce coach. Between drinks, he walked me through everything, locking down accounts, separating finances, gathering proof. I barely slept, replaying the day on repeat while scrolling through attorney reviews until dawn. The next 2 weeks were a blur of consultations. Some lawyers wanted retainers bigger than my car payment. Others seemed barely competent. Eventually, I found a guy named Lucas, sharp, realistic, and surprisingly human. When I showed him the screenshots and photos of what I'd walked in on, he actually smiled.
He said we had a strong case to reduce or possibly eliminate alimony. Still, he warned me that judges often favored the lower-earning spouse no matter what, but he promised to fight hard. For the first time since my life imploded, I felt like someone was actually on my side. Then came the next nightmare. Serving Carolyn with divorce papers. Serving her turned into its own circus. Carolyn dodged the process server for nearly 3 weeks. She rearranged her schedule, pretended not to be home, and even had her mother tell the server she'd moved to Florida. Eventually, they caught her coming out of a yoga class, probably the most honest workout she'd done in months. Even then, she used every single day of the 30-day response window, purely out of spite. She knew exactly what she was doing. Every delay meant more billable hours for my lawyer. Once the divorce proceedings officially began, Carolyn transformed into the undisputed queen of petty behavior. She forgot required documents, showed up late to every meeting, and suddenly couldn't locate bank statements I knew for a fact existed. She demanded exhaustive inventories of everything we owned, right down to individual utensils. Her lawyers sent over settlement proposals that were laughable. She wanted the house, my 401k, and alimony on top of it all. The nerve of this woman, cheating on me and still demanding half my retirement, was almost impressive. By that point, we'd been separated for months, and she was still openly seeing her affair partner. Mutual friends confirmed it. She was out there enjoying life while doing everything in her power to make mine miserable. Every time we got close to resolving something, she'd introduce new demands or suddenly change her mind. It felt like she was getting some twisted satisfaction from watching my legal fees pile up. Each time Lucas had to respond to another absurd proposal, I could practically picture her laughing on the way to her boyfriend's place. While she dragged the process out, I tried to move forward. I dipped my toe back into dating, not my proudest era. I downloaded all the apps and had a few meaningless hookups, convincing myself this was what moving on looked like. It wasn't. Every morning after felt worse. Each empty encounter reminded me why I'd shut down the open relationship idea in the first place. I've never been wired for casual connections. I want consistency, shared routines, inside jokes, the same person beside me every morning. The hookup culture just left me feeling hollow, like I was trying to patch a deep wound with the wrong material. I needed something to occupy my mind besides work, court filings, and emotional regret. Before my marriage consumed my life with 60-hour work weeks and constant conflict, I used to read obsessively.
The kind of reader who stayed up all night just to finish one more chapter. So one Saturday, instead of swiping through apps or refreshing my email for lawyer updates, I went downtown to a small independent bookstore. You know the kind. Creaky floors, that unmistakable old book smell, maybe a cat sleeping in the window. I wandered into the science fiction section and immediately felt lost. Apparently, the genre had exploded while I was busy trying to save my marriage. Massive books, unpronounceable titles, endless multi-book series. I must have looked completely overwhelmed because the woman next to me laughed, not mockingly, just warmly. She was holding a huge book that could have doubled as a blunt weapon. When I looked at her, she smiled and asked if I needed help. I admitted I wanted good sci-fi, but had no idea where to start. One thing led to another, and suddenly we were sitting in these worn, comfortable chairs in the corner while she walked me through modern science fiction.
She spoke with so much enthusiasm. Her eyes lit up when she talked about her favorite series. She had this small habit of tucking her hair behind her ear when she got excited, and it was ridiculously endearing. What started as a quick recommendation turned into a 2-hour conversation. We talked about everything from classic Asimov to modern space operas. She told me about a series involving parallel universes, and I shared my old college favorites. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about lawyers, betrayal, or dating apps. I was just a guy talking about books with a woman who genuinely cared what I had to say. When we finally stood up, I worked up the nerve to ask for her number. My hands were actually shaking while I typed it into my phone, pretty embarrassing for a 36-year-old. But she made me feel like a teenager again. I walked out of that bookstore with her number, a copy of The Three-Body Problem, and the first real smile I'd had in months.
That night, I kept rereading our text exchange, and it struck how different it felt from the empty, recycled conversations I'd had on dating apps. There was an ease to it, something genuine. When we went on our first proper date, I knew I had to be upfront about my situation. I'd practiced the speech in my head a dozen times, fully expecting her to bolt the moment I mentioned my ongoing divorce. But Emma, yes, that's her name, just took a sip of her wine and smiled. "I appreciate you being honest," she said. "Everyone has baggage. At least you're actually dealing with yours. No judgment, no awkward silence, no sudden change of subject." She even joked that dating someone mid-divorce meant she'd never have to wonder if he was secretly married. Emma was the opposite of Carolyn in every way. Where Carolyn escalated conflict, Emma talked things through. Where Carolyn demanded attention, Emma offered it freely. She remembered details I mentioned weeks earlier, showed real interest in my work, and never once made me feel ashamed for my divorce. For the first time in years, I felt heard. The best part? I wasn't even looking for her. No apps, no setups, just two people connecting over books in a quiet store. 5 months into dating, I was falling hard. Everything about Emma felt right. The way she sent me book recommendations during work days, the notes she tucked into the novels she let me, the way she actually listened when I talked about my day. Meanwhile, Carolyn continued dragging out the divorce. Every time we got close to finalizing it, she found a new way to stall. Missing signatures, disputed assets, forgotten joint accounts. You name it, she tried it. Emma was endlessly patient. She never pressured me, never complained about dating someone who was technically still married. She held my hand during frustrating calls with Lucas and reminded me that it wouldn't last forever.
I was finally happy again. Truly happy, not just pretending. Which, in hindsight, should have been a warning, because that's exactly when everything went off the rails. Emma and I had just spent a perfect Saturday together. Lunch at a cozy cafe, wandering through shops, laughing about nothing. As we walked back to her car in the mall parking lot, the sun was setting and we were debating what movie to watch that night. Then everything shattered. I heard it before I saw it, an engine screaming, pushed to its limit. When I turned toward the sound, a car was racing straight at us, clearly aimed at Emma. Instinct took over. I grabbed her arm and yanked, but I wasn't fast enough. The car clipped her leg, and I watched in horror as it snapped. The sound, bone-breaking mixed with her scream, will never leave me. She collapsed onto the asphalt, and I went down with her, trying to shield her body. I had my phone out, ready to call 911, when tires shrieked again.
The car had crashed into another vehicle and was reversing. That's when it hit me. This wasn't an accident. Emma was sobbing, her leg bent at a sickening angle. I knew if we stayed there, we'd both die. I grabbed her under the arms and dragged her between two parked cars, my heart pounding out of my chest. She cried out with every movement, but I didn't stop. The car surged forward again, smashing into the vehicles we'd just hidden behind. The impact set off alarms everywhere. By then, people were running toward us, shouting, phones raised. Chaos filled the parking lot. Sirens of alarms, voices yelling, Emma crying beside me. Then the driver's door opened, and time stopped. Carolyn stepped out. For a split second, my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Carolyn didn't look frantic or confused. She looked focused, calm, like she'd just finished a task she'd planned down to the smallest detail. The noise around us faded into a dull roar.
Car alarms wailed. People shouted. Someone screamed for an ambulance, but all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. "What did you do?" I shouted, my voice cracking. She didn't answer me. Her eyes were locked on Emma. Then she smiled. Not a full smile, just a slight curl at the corner of her mouth, enough to make my stomach drop. Someone grabbed Carolyn's arm, a man I didn't recognize, maybe a passerby, shouting that the police were on their way. She didn't resist. She didn't even look surprised. She just kept staring at us, like she was memorizing the scene. Emma was trembling violently beside me, her face drained of color. I pressed my jacket against her leg, trying to slow the bleeding, whispering that help was coming, even though I was barely holding myself together. Carolyn finally looked at me. "You moved on fast," she said, her tone disturbingly conversational. "I didn't think you'd replace me so easily." Replaced. That word hit harder than the sight of her stepping out of that car. "I divorced you because you cheated," I snapped. "You tried to kill her." She shrugged. Actually shrugged. "I just wanted to talk," she said. "She shouldn't have been there." By the time the police arrived, Carolyn was still eerily composed. She allowed herself to be cuffed without a fight, calmly repeating that it was all a misunderstanding, that she lost control of the car. Witnesses immediately shut that down. Too many people had seen her reverse and try again. Paramedics loaded Emma onto a stretcher. She clutched my hand so tightly I thought my fingers would break. "Don't leave," she whispered, tears streaking down her temples. "I'm not going anywhere," I promised, meaning it with everything I had. At the hospital, doctors confirmed what I already knew: multiple fractures, surgery required, months of recovery. I sat by her bed all night, replaying the moment over and over, wondering how close I'd come to losing her.
The next morning, my phone exploded with calls. My lawyer, the police, and finally, a number I didn't recognize. It was the district attorney. Carolyn wasn't just being charged with assault. They were charging her with attempted murder. And suddenly, the divorce, the endless paperwork, the petty delays, the financial warfare meant absolutely nothing. This was no longer about a broken marriage. It was about survival. The courtroom felt smaller than it should have, like the walls were slowly closing in. I sat behind the prosecution, hands clenched, while Carolyn's attorney argued that what happened was an emotional outburst, a moment of panic fueled by heartbreak. Heartbreak. Emma was in a wheelchair beside me, her leg wrapped in casts and metal supports.
She didn't flinch when Carolyn was brought in, but I felt the subtle tightening of her grip on my sleeve. I placed my hand over hers, grounding both of us. The surveillance footage ended the argument before it really began. The video showed everything: the acceleration, the deliberate turn, the impact, the pause, and then the reverse. The moment that stole all plausible deniability. Carolyn didn't look at the screen. She stared straight ahead, jaw locked, eyes empty. Witness after witness testified: mall security, bystanders, a paramedic who described Emma's injuries in clinical detail that made my stomach churn. When I took the stand, I didn't recognize my own voice. I told the court about the threats, the manipulation during the divorce, the obsession I'd brushed off as bitterness. I admitted what I hadn't wanted to see, that Carolyn wasn't just angry, she was unraveling. Emma testified last. Her voice shook at first, but she didn't stop. She described the sound of the engine, the terror of realizing she was being targeted, the pain so intense she blacked out. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Carolyn finally broke then, not with tears.
With rage. "She stole my life," Carolyn screamed, lunging forward before deputies restrained her. "She took what was mine." Mine. That word echoed through the room long after she was dragged away. The verdict didn't take long. Guilty. Attempted murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment. Sentencing came weeks later. The judge didn't mince words. Carolyn's actions were premeditated, violent, and driven by entitlement. She was sentenced to 25 years, with the possibility of parole after 18. As she was let out, she turned back once, just once, and looked straight at me. There was no remorse there, just disbelief, like she still didn't understand how she'd lost. Afterward, everything slowed down. The divorce was finalized without another fight. Her assets were frozen, her claims dismissed. What had once felt like a war ended with a single signature. Emma's recovery became my world.
Physical therapy, surgeries, long nights managing pain and frustration. There were moments she broke down, mourning the life she had before that parking lot. And every time, I stayed. Because love, real love, doesn't run when things get hard. It shows up. Recovery isn't dramatic the way movies make it look. There were no sudden breakthroughs or inspiring montages. Just repetition, pain, slow, stubborn progress measured in inches instead of miles. Emma hated needing help at first. She apologized for everything. When I adjusted her pillows, when I drove her to therapy, when she leaned on me walking down the hallway. One night, exhausted and frustrated, she finally snapped. "I don't want to be someone you have to take care of," she said, tears spilling over. "You didn't sign up for this." I knelt in front of her chair and took her hands. "I didn't sign up for almost losing you either," I said quietly. "But here we are." I sold the house that had once felt like a future and used the money to start fresh. No ghosts, no reminders. One evening, nearly a year after the attack, Emma and I returned to that same bookstore. The cat was still asleep in the window. The chairs still creaked. The sci-fi section still felt overwhelming. We sat where we'd first talked, and Emma handed me a book. Another recommendation, another beginning. Inside the cover, she'd written a note. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing me. Every day." I didn't need more proof than that. Some people leave scars so deep they change the shape of your life. Others help you heal them, not by erasing the pain, but by reminding you that survival can still turn into something beautiful. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. 2 years later, Emma walked without a limp most days. On bad ones, she leaned into me without apology, and I loved that she no longer felt the need to say sorry for it. Life didn't return to what it had been before the parking lot. It became something else entirely. Quieter, stronger, built with intention instead of assumption. We moved to a smaller place near the river. Nothing fancy, just sunlight in the mornings and enough space for bookshelves that kept multiplying. Sunday mornings became sacred. Coffee, shared silence, pages turning in sync. The kind of peace you don't notice until you've lived without it. I used to think love was proven by endurance, how much chaos you could survive together.
I know better now. Real love shows itself in safety, in consistency, in knowing the person beside you won't turn into a stranger when things get hard. Sometimes Carolyn crossed my mind, not with anger, not even fear, just a distant awareness, like remembering a storm that once destroyed your house, but no longer controls the weather. She existed in another life now, sealed behind concrete and locked doors, where she could no longer reach us.
The past stopped chasing me when I stopped running from it. One evening, back in that same bookstore, I bought a ring. Nothing dramatic, just something simple, honest, and strong, like us. When I asked Emma, it wasn't a grand speech, just a quiet question over dinner, my hands steady, my heart finally at rest. She said yes without hesitation. We didn't need fireworks. We'd already survived the worst. And when I look at her now, laughing, healed but changed, real and present, I understand something I never did before. Some endings aren't failures, they're escapes. And some beginnings only happen because you were brave enough to walk away from the wrong person, and strong enough to stay when the right one needed you most.